Russell Wilson has landed himself with a new team that will face the Denver Broncos in 2024. Will this be a week one primetime game? We'll dive deep into that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Do us a favor, if you love Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more, you want that every single day, all year long, here's what you got to do. Hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. I'm Cody Roark. I cover the Broncos as a reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, NFL free agency is here, and one thing we've always learned, that free agency isn't free. And for the Denver Broncos, especially as it pertains to former quarterback Russell Wilson, Denver is paying for him to be on an entirely new team here in 2024. It didn't take long for Russ to land on his feet. There's a lot of conversations going on about that, but Russell Wilson signing a one-year vet minimum deal with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Denver on the books essentially for $38 million for him this season. This has implications, right? Like normally we wouldn't cover this, but it's very interesting because the Broncos play the Steelers this season. Makes things a little bit more interesting as we know that we anticipate a Russell Wilson versus Broncos matchup here at some point in 2024.
We absolutely do, and we'll see Russell Wilson coming to Denver, and it's going to be a very fascinating fit for him with Pittsburgh, Cody, as we've seen just people discussing where could he land, how much is he going to sign for, is anybody going to do a multi-year deal with Russ? Ultimately, the market was pretty cold, I would say. I mean, he got the minimum from Pittsburgh. Apparently, according to reports, there was no team willing to offer him anything beyond 2024, so this is really a trial basis for Pittsburgh. It's a no strings attached kind of thing. I saw Kyle Brandt on Good Morning Football compared it to like finding a gift card, for somewhere and being like, all right, well, I guess I didn't pay for this gift card, but I can use it. I mean, Russell playing for the minimum this season, like, is he even guaranteed a starting job there in Pittsburgh? I think people are going to ask that question with Kenny Pickett still on the roster. So we'll see. It's going to be a fascinating situation with Russ and the unstoppable force that seems to be kind of this decline in perception of what his career is, with the immovable object of Mike Tomlin having 17 straight non-losing seasons with Pittsburgh. I think that's what makes this the ideal fit for Russ to get back on track, to get back onto a winning team, a team that has a culture of winning and stability and the ability, even with we've seen Kenny Pickett struggling at the quarterback position, Cody. Now Russ gets to go there and I think be an obvious upgrade. I know there's been debate over whether or not he'll be a starter. I don't think there should be. I think Russ will start, and I think that this presents him with a great opportunity to get back on track, right? Arthur Smith, the new offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh. So the fit is a little odd from that perspective because we know Arthur likes to attack the middle of the field, but Russ has an opportunity with a great franchise, stability. I think he can get back on track this season.
Can Pickens be a guy that really thrives with Russell Wilson as well? There's Pat Freiermuth as well. I mean, I'm excited to see that matchup there. And folks, look, there are a lot of Broncos fans that are happy that Russ is gone, and that's fine, right? And there's a lot of Broncos fans that just don't like Russell Wilson that are still talking about Russ in every context it gets brought up here. But I think if we look at the situation for what it is, and even Pittsburgh Steelers fans, like, I'm sorry, like, you're telling me that Russell Wilson, right? Things didn't end for him great in Denver, right? Absolutely. Like, things didn't go according to plan. It's the unfortunate nature of the business. It didn't work out. But for people to actually think that Kenny Pickett is better than what Russell Wilson's going to bring to the table for what Pittsburgh is going to do, like, come on. Kenny Pickett was a guy who, I think the narrative last year was he was healthy enough to come back from injury, decided not to because Mason Rudolph was starting ahead of him. And when Mason Rudolph isn't getting upended by Kenny Pickett, I think that says a little bit that you need to know about how they feel about Pickett. And Russ is a guy, look, this is a low-risk, high-reward type of deal here for the Steelers and their offense. Now, granted, look, the Steelers' offense struggled last year. And for the last few years, they've struggled. And primarily, a lot of that was under former direction of Matt Canada, who was their offensive coordinator. You mentioned Arthur Smith coming in. I wonder what that's going to do to change maybe the landscape of how the Steelers offense operates. But more importantly, rather than diving deep into that, I think it's going to be very interesting because the Denver Broncos will host the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2024. Not only will the new Broncos quarterback have to deal with guys like TJ Watt, and that defense is pretty talented, but, the Broncos defense is going to more than likely go up against Russell Wilson, who, look, I don't think Russ would have signed anywhere if he wasn't going to be the starter. I don't think he's going to go sign to be the backup to Kenny Pickett. To me, I think there's a promise in there. He is the projected starter here under Mike Tomlin, and I'm very curious to see what Mike Tomlin can get out of Russ here, but it makes that matchup against the Broncos very interesting. Sayre, I want to ask you, is this a week 1 primetime game, or is this maybe a middle of the season game or an end of the season game? Where do you have your money here?
I think let's go week 1 prime time, right? I mean, the same thing happened when Russ came to Denver and got the chance to play against Seattle right away, to go back to Seattle on that Monday Night Football, right? So it was one of those situations where I think now the NFL, let's see history repeat itself a little bit here as Russell Wilson comes back to Denver for a rematch. The thing that I wonder is the drama between Russ and the Broncos all offseason, is that going to be something that's similar to what we saw with the Jets and Hackett and, Sean Payton, things like that? I don't think anything's that, there's not that much vitriol and things like that. But really, I mean, Russell, he's been embarrassed by the Broncos. They benched him late last season. I know he's still getting paid by the organization a lot of money, but that he was embarrassed. His value has never been lower. Like the fact that he's signing for the veteran minimum, $1.21 million. It's not just to stick it to the Broncos, in my opinion, Cody. I don't think that that's the case necessarily. I think there should have been way more teams interested in Russ at that price point if that were the case. I think this is an indicator that this is a trial basis. I think teams are rightfully kind of spooked by what they've seen from Russ the last couple of years, but it's a very low risk move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's no strings attached here. I mean, they don't have to commit to Russ for any amount of time, even this year. So it's a great low risk move for them. It's just fascinating to see how far things have come from where the Broncos traded, 2 entire draft classes basically, and you give the farm in a $243 million contract to get Russ. And now here we are talking about him signing for $1.21 million. It's crazy how fast life comes at you in the NFL, isn't it?
The NFL cycle is constantly evolving, changing. It uppercuts you, hits you so low that somebody's going to come up to you and say, you know why. Some people might get that reference. Some may not. It's okay here. But one thing is for certain, the Broncos will face Russell Wilson in 2024, and there are going to be a lot of interesting dynamics and storylines leading up to that matchup. Broncos Country, do you think that's going to be a week 1 game? Let us know if you're listening or watching here. Locked On Broncos. But the Broncos also lost another portion of their offense when they lost center Lloyd Cushenberry. He signed a deal with the Tennessee Titans. What type of ripple effects does this have here on the Broncos offensive line? We'll dive deeper to that and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and a lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, what would you do and how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you to make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. That's where BetterHelp can come in and help you. I've utilized BetterHelp therapy in the past where I was able to schedule a therapy session with a therapist online at my own convenience based on my schedule. I could do it from the comfort of my home. I filled out a brief questionnaire. It matched me to a therapist that I vibed really well with, and she helped me find tools to help me deal with the anxiety and the stress that I was dealing with in my day-to-day life, both career and personal life. But if you don't match well with your therapist, just don't have a good vibe, you can switch therapists at any time at no additional charge to yourself. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and best of all, suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
The Denver Broncos are going to have a new starting center in the 2024 season after Russell Wilson bolted to Pittsburgh. The guy who snapped him the ball each of the last 2 seasons, Lloyd Cushenberry, he bolted to the Tennessee Titans in free agency. Cody and I are going to break down what that means. Who's going to replace Lloyd Cushenberry and the Broncos? Are they confident in some guys that they've drafted in recent years to be able to pick up that mantle and take the ball every single snap. We're going to break that down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but we want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you everyday listeners of the show. For you everydayers, you know that Cody and I were going to be breaking down every single move, every single detail of the Denver Broncos offseason in real time as it's coming out. Cody and I are sitting here recording episodes as news is trickling in through the wire. So tune into Locked On Broncos every single day. Set the notifications. If you're not subscribed on YouTube, do that as well, because we're going to have you covered for every move this offseason right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Cody, Lloyd Cushenberry got a really good deal from the Tennessee Titans, parlaying his great 2023 season into free agency money, which, I mean, great for Lloyd Cushenberry, but I think we all kind of came to grips with this a couple of months ago, felt like this was writing on the wall. Let's talk about Cushenberry's deal, and let's talk about the fallout for the Broncos. What do you think of the Cushenberry signing for Tennessee, and what do you think the Broncos are going to do next?
I think for Lloyd Cushenberry, you and I have been a proponent of the show of saying, like, we've acknowledged how much he has improved year over year from his rookie season. Like, rookie season, he was drafted. I think we were both initially really excited about his prospects. He's coming off of the national championship team at LSU, one of the greatest college football offenses of all time. And he's very smart, cerebral. The Broncos have needed a guy like that. He comes in his rookie season, and look, just the game was a little fast for him. And not only that, he was out physicaled in a lot of sense, especially that game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Vita Vea absolutely ate his lunch there. But the Broncos brought in competition almost every single year for him since he's been a member of the team, and he's always emerged as the guy with the starting job, really, and it was never really in question. So, even though they brought in guys to compete, Lloyd used that as an opportunity to get better. He got stronger, and I think there was drastic improvement, which you look in the last couple of seasons, it's evidently there. I thought Lloyd was one of the more improved players the Broncos had on their roster outside of Nick Bonito last season. So now he gets rewarded with a new deal with the Tennessee Titans, who are going in an entirely different direction. No Derrick Henry. They're going with Tony Pollard at this point. Very curious to see what the direction of the quarterback position is going to be for that organization. But they're undergoing a lot of changes after they fired Mike Vrabel. And now the question here is, okay, for Cushenberry, can he now maybe emerge into something else? Like, I think for Tennessee Titans fans, that's the hope that they have. But I think when you look at where the Denver Broncos are at, I think it definitely kind of answered one of our questions that you and I had is, okay, is Cush going to be back in the fold? He was gone relatively quickly once the legal negotiating period opened on Monday initially, and then he signed pretty quickly there with Tennessee. Now, what does this mean for the Broncos when it pertains to the center position, right? Because you're already paying Mike McGlinchey, a right tackle, a lot of money. You're paying Ben Powers a lot of money. Garrett Bull set to make a lot of money here for the Broncos, but then, okay, now you're going to be set to extend Quinn Miners here this offseason, which, as we've seen in the last couple of days, the guard market is unbelievably expensive now. So what is that going to look like? Well, the Broncos may just choose to roll in-house here. They have two options between Alex Forsyth and Luke Wattenberg. Wattenberg obviously drafted 5th round out of Washington. Obviously, you look at Forsyth, drafted 7th round out of the University of Oregon. To me, it's between these two guys here, which I think the Broncos are comfortable with. Now, Sarah, I got to ask you the question. Is that something that you're comfortable with here as the team moves forward, especially with some of the moves that some of the AFC West teams have made in the division on the defensive line?
I think you've got to, if you're the Denver Broncos, you've got to bank on some player development, right? Which means you do need to count on one of Alex Forsyth or Luke Wattenberg being that starter for you going forward. It has to be an economical option. I know that a lot of times Broncos country, we want to see the team go after a free agent and put the Band-Aid on. But look, this team is no longer in the Band-Aid business. They are overhauling this roster. They're trusting in the coaching staff, and they're trusting in player development. We're going to see it at the cornerback position. We're seeing it at the safety position. We're going to see it on the offensive line, I think at center specifically, where the Broncos kind of have a history of doing well with late round centers. And I know that that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's kind of like scouting the helmet versus scouting the player, but they do have a lengthy history of unheralded centers being able to be long-term solutions for the team. So would it be surprising to see a former 5th rounder like Wattenberg or a former 7th rounder like Forsyth become that starter? I don't think so. And I think you can put some confidence in Zach Strief, the offensive line coach, developing these players and getting them ready. You talked about Cushenberry getting ready physically. I mean, that I can't say that necessarily happened just in the couple of months of the offseason, but Cody, I think it really did. I mean, the Broncos came in, you're giving honest feedback to a player and saying, hey, this is where we see you need to get better. This is what you need to do to get a big money contract. Cushenberry did those things. And now it's going to be Luke Wattenberg, Alex Forsyth. You guys came out of college with all this experience. You did all these different things. Here's what you need to do to become a second contract player in the NFL. I feel like those guys spent their for Wattenberg, his second NFL season, for Forsyth, his rookie season, they spent the year learning things, learning the Sean Payton offense, getting to know Zach Strief, getting to know the scheme. They're getting stronger physically, I'm sure. They're getting ready and acclimated for NFL action. If the Broncos feel confident in going with a youth movement there, I think let's say, hey, dive headfirst into that end of the pool.
Yeah, well, especially with how expensive Denver's offensive line is going to be, they're going to need production out of that unit regardless. And look, obviously, Denver's offensive line wasn't as bad as I think a lot of people made it out to be last season, though they did struggle in some areas. But that's something that you go back and you figure out, is that a scheme issue? Is that just us putting our players in a position to succeed if you're thinking from the mindset of Sean Payton? But on top of that, I mean, between these two guys, Wattenberg and Forsyth, they're locker buddies. They're right next to each other, and they're fun to talk about, especially last year as Oregon was preparing to take on Washington. There was a lot of fun banter there. I'm an Oregon Ducks fan, so I was kind of stirring the pot between those guys a little bit. But Forsyth, obviously, some people are going to look at, okay, well, he was a 7th-round center. I don't think you really see guys in the NFL this much. I think the standard for like centers, unless they're like a blue-collar, blue-chip type center, you see some of those guys go in round 2. But now, primarily, you see round 3, round 4, a run on centers in the NFL draft. So Alex Forsyth was part of one of the best offensive lines in the country when he was still playing, and Bo Nix was under center with him. There's a chance that maybe those two somehow reunite this upcoming season. Maybe that's part of the plan here for the Broncos. I do know this, is that I think these guys both offer flexibility. I think Forsyth is viewed more as a center, whereas Wattenberg is viewed as kind of this hybrid swing option, can play center, can play guard for you. But I think that they really like Forsyth for the center job here this upcoming season. Just the speculation, the hunch that I have there. And for what, context here about maybe why they think that, you look at Denver last year, they used all of 2023 really as a redshirt year for him and guys like J.L. Skinner, to kind of say the least here. But then you look at where Forsyth was at, getting a lot of reps in practice, a major part of their scout team, one scout team player of the week for them several times. And so that gave them a better idea in the building. And on top of that, George Payton came out and said it this offseason, and he also reiterated at the NFL Scouting Combine, they think that Forsyth is a starting center in the NFL. So to me, that is the tea leaves. That's the writing on the wall. I think the Broncos go young there, and I think it does help, right? If Ben Powers has a little bit of a better year and you have Quinn Miners continuing to do what he's doing in terms of dominating the opposition, those two guys right there will help a guy like Forsyth, I think, adjust to the learning curve of the NFL a little bit easier.
And you talked about the ripple effect of these moves, Cody. I think ultimately with Quinn Miners looking at this guard market shaping up, I mean, guards legitimately, as we're recording this episode, they're getting $20 million annually. We just saw Robert Hunt of the Dolphins get $20 million annually from the Carolina Panthers, $65 million guaranteed. And look, Quinn Miners is seeing multiple deals like this come off the board, and the Broncos value the guard position. That was something that Ben Powers said when he was signed. He's like, Sean Payton values the guard position so much in this offense. Let's say that let's get down the road a little bit. Let's put the cart before the horse just a little bit here. Quinn Miners in line for an extension. This is his final year on his rookie deal. The Broncos may want to get in on the market now while it's still at $20 million a year and not $25 million a year. Let's say Quinn does get extended. If the Broncos can't get a quarterback that they want in the first round, does that then go, you got to go tackle in the first round, because you're not going to be able to afford Garrett Bowles if you're paying Powers, McGlinchey, and Quinn Miners at those 3 positions. This ripple effect could be massive for the Broncos. It could affect the first round of the 2024 NFL draft. So I guess stay tuned for all that and maybe bookmark this episode just in case that does end up happening.
Well, and I think another thing you have to look at too is, this 2024 NFL draft class for the Broncos, 8 total picks for them. It's going to be crucial. I would like to see them address all offense, honestly, with all 8 picks. If that's the case, they could even acquire more picks. We'll see what they decide to do here. But there was one draft class that had a lot of excitement, a lot of buzz around it that never met expectations. And with Lloyd Cushenberry's departure, it puts the nail in the coffin on the 2020 NFL draft class. We revisit that and analyze John Elway's final draft class as a member of the Broncos in hindsight here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And if you've ever had a frustrating ticket buying experience, you know how much of a hassle it can be to go to buy tickets at the last minute and all of a sudden they're gone. They're sold out. Well, the Game Time app, they can help alleviate that, and they have a wide variety of special deals that can get you jam-packed action, good seats, good vantage points, and most of all, meaningful experiences either with you, your wife, your kids, your family, whatever event, whether it's a sporting event, a concert, a comedy event, theater, and more. Game Time has everything that you could be looking for. Game Time, it's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. And that's important in today's world. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Whether you're going to a basketball game here at Ball Arena as the Denver Nuggets are making a push for the postseason, you want to see all the action at Nikola Jokic, you want to see what the view is going to be like from your seat in your section, they have you covered inside the app there. They have all-in prices which show you your total up front so you know you're getting a great deal before you even check out. And you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The 2020 NFL draft class, for the most part, is entirely gone here for the Denver Broncos as NFL free agency kicks off. There's a chance they could still re-sign one of the players that are an unrestricted free agent. But looking back, man, what an exciting, potentially buzzsaw of the Rocky Mountain roller coaster at the time when the Broncos did this draft class under John Elway in 2020. There was a lot of potential. There was a lot of excitement and visions about what could be here. It ultimately never panned out. Real quick, I want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get us for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I mean, Sayre, I think looking back at it, this was an interesting time for the Broncos, right? 2020, the NFL draft. Obviously, there was a lot of questions because this was at the height of the pandemic starting, and obviously just, changes and not being able to be in the team facility. Most of us, I think, in the media, we didn't even get a chance to meet these rookies in the 2020 season outside of just locker room availability. There were no introductory press conferences, so to speak. So that was tough in terms of these guys getting acclimated. Overall, looking back at this draft class, I mean, Jerry Jeudy, the number 1 pick for the Broncos overall, not in terms of selection, but their first round pick for them. I think, was it 15th? I think it was 15th, wasn't it?
Yeah, 15th overall.
It was 15th overall. And then you have back-to-back picks. You have KJ Hamler in round number 2 at the wide receiver position. And I just remember thinking to myself, oh, wow, you have Cortland Sutton, you have Tim Patrick. Now you're adding Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Like, we were so excited. And the unfortunate nature is we never got to see a single ounce of those 4 guys together at all, which in hindsight here today makes it very disappointing.
Yeah, and they also, remember, added Melvin Gordon that offseason, and Drew Lock was supposed to, I mean, he was coming off those 5 games at the end of his rookie season where we're like, holy cow, man, things are shaping up. I know folks have been saying the Broncos have needed to rebuild for a long time. Kind of feel like that 2019, 2020, that was kind of where they really tried. They tried to go young at quarterback. They tried to get the young pieces offensively, and they tried to draft well. I mean, they tried to bulk up in the NFL draft. Unfortunately, this 2020 class, the failure of it, and I know we've mentioned this before, we had some issue with the discussion of a failed draft class versus a player being a failure, Cody. Like, the Broncos are just as much at fault for this draft class failing as the players are for not doing their part, right? And so we're not talking about these players failed the Broncos. It's a both and sort of thing. But you mentioned Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. How about Michael Ojemudia and Lloyd Cushenberry, McTelvin Agim, all top 100 picks in that draft for the Broncos. And then on day 3, you've got like Albert Okwuegbunam. You and I were doing an episode of the show when he was drafted, and I believe we called that one from we called our shot on that Albert O pick, and it happened. So I mean, just picks like this that it hasn't worked out. Netani Muti, Justin Sternad, who's a free agent. I know there's questions about, is he still on the team? Is he not? He may ultimately end up back on the team, but as of right now, every single one of the picks from this draft class are completely gone, and it's derailed the Broncos' ability to be able to have roster stability at this point. There's not really many building blocks on the team when you draft guys at certain positions like they did in this class wide receiver, cornerback, interior defensive line. You expected those guys to work out at premier positions, and ultimately they got their shot. It didn't work out. Too many coaching changes. Call it whatever you want to. This draft class, the last of John Elway's in Denver, is ultimately maybe his worst ever.
When you look at the final two picks there, Tyree Cleveland, a receiver, and then last but not least, Derek Tuska, outside linebacker here. And I think overall, we can look at this. You look at the quantity of picks that Denver had in this draft. Like, it's great, right? But it's like, what do you do with that? I think on paper, like, even if we go back, let's pretend that not knowing what we know now, you go back, you look at the guys like Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Ojemudia, Cushenberry, and even Albert O, and even McTelvin Agim. Like, those are premier picks in terms of, like, when you look at what they did in college, you're like, wow, like, this should help the Broncos get better. And in some aspects, some of these guys did not thrive in the environment in Denver, and vice versa. Like you said, it's not just the Broncos, it's not just the players' fault, it's collective blame on both sides there. But I think this is a great opportunity to, we're getting ready to prepare for the 2024 NFL draft right now, right? Denver's got 8 picks, and everybody every year gets so excited about mock drafts and who they think should go where, right? Everything can look great on paper, but then you have to give it time to pan out. And I think for the most part, we've given this 2020 draft class a lot of time before we can really grade it. I think going back now, what would you give it in terms of an overall grade? Because I think when we look at the overall process, I understand where John Elway was going. I look at the things that you mentioned, the contingency plays. Okay, you got a young quarterback in Drew Lock, you get him a receiver with speed, and you get him a receiver who's a really damn good separation creator, route runner, and you combine that with guys who got 6'5" speed. Albert Okwuegbunam had a terrific start to his rookie season before suffering the ACL injury, and things kind of, spiraled out after that. Ideally, the thought process was right. Ultimately, it didn't work out, which goes to show that nothing in the NFL is guaranteed. I think that's an important lesson as we approach 2024's NFL draft next month.
Yeah. Yes, 100%, Cody. I mean, this is why the player development side is such a huge, crucial component. Like, the Broncos just couldn't commit to any certain coaching staff. They couldn't commit to offensive coordinator Rich Scangarello. Not saying they should have, but they just didn't have the right coaches in place to develop these players, to get the most out of these players. Like, if let's say the San Francisco 49ers had made the exact same selections that the Broncos did from 2019 to 2020 and 2021, let's say, those players, Cody, I kind of feel like they would have done a lot better with the infrastructure of that organization, the coaches that actually know how to get the most out of guys. Like, we see Broncos fans so frustrated. Like, how is Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins and Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, like all these guys from the 2020 class have so much more success than Jerry Jeudy? It's because of situation. It's because of the fact that he went to a team or those guys went to teams where they were properly utilized. They had coaches that knew how to maximize talent. I mean, Rich Scangarello, Pat Shurmur, the Broncos coaches, while those guys were under contract, just simply did not know how to get that job done, and they couldn't do it. They didn't have the quarterback to be able to distribute the ball. They just, it all required, it's all encompassing, right? It's not that, well, Jerry Jeudy, he just wasn't as good as people thought, or KJ Hamler, he wasn't. There's a story to every single one of these guys. Injuries, inconsistency, coaching staff, player development, situation, all of these different things factored in. I think as the overall grade, though, Cody, you've got to give it an F. I mean, it's a complete failure. Nobody stayed with the team. Nobody became a second contract player in Denver. It's a terrible draft. It didn't work out, and it's a shame. It's got us to the point that we are today.
Yeah, and look at all those roster spots of what could have been and all the different cycles. Okay, well, this didn't work out. Who are we bringing in free agency or the next year's draft to maybe compete or challenge, for a spot there? Like, just the revolving door of the roster, the turnover of the roster has the Broncos in the position that they're at. And look, it is unpopular. I know Sean Payton is not a very popular guy in the eyes of some people in Broncos country, and there's fans in Broncos country who love what Sean Payton is doing. But I also can see it from the perspective. Sean is coming into this thing and saying, look, I don't care who is on the roster. I'm going to build this roster the way that I see fit, but adds more pressure onto him overall, ultimately, because he's going to make the call. He and George Payton are going to collaborate. George is going to come to Sean. Who do you need? What do you need to feel like you can, that we can be successful with this year? And George is going to go out there and make it happen. He's going to get on the phone. He's going to negotiate with agents. They're going to be in contact. They're going to be monitoring boards. If Sean wants to move up in the NFL draft, George is going to be making the call to make that happen. So it is a collaborative effort as the Broncos look to play Moneyball a little bit. That might be the path for them here going forward. Sean's not going to come out and say it's a rebuild here. We've acknowledged we believe it is a rebuild. I'll be very curious to see what the Broncos decide to do through the rest of free agency here and in the NFL draft that gives us a true idea, true measuring stick. Are they actually rebuilding? That, to me, I think is going to be a big question to follow this entire offseason. We'll get some answers at the end of the NFL draft next month here. But Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts on the 2020 NFL draft class. Disappointing how it didn't work out because there was so much potential with some of those players on that roster. Unfortunately, it did not work out. That's the nature of the National Football League. One thing is for certain, though, Sayre and I, we're going to be back tomorrow with a brand new episode of the show. NFL free agency updates. What are the Broncos doing? Have some players from their team moved on to other teams here. There's so much we're going to break down here. You're going to get that on tomorrow's brand new episode of the show.